Love podcasts, hate nonsense. It's the PoliticsJOE podcast, ladies and gentlemen. Woo! That's 2 people clapping in the room. The 2 people on camera. That's a sarcastic clap from the rest of the people in the room.
Well, we had a full start, didn't we, Ed?
We did. There
Something
was
you're used to.
a technical error which took hours to fix.
Yeah.
We've recorded this 10 hours after we were supposed to. Ava, haven't we?
Yeah. We've got a game for you.
Yeah, we do. What's the game, Ava?
The game is we've hocked tour. That's it. That's the game.
The game is guess who this is.
Okay, guess who? Yeah, guess who's touring
Yes.
in the Hawk video. There's an original. As part of it is Hawk. You've got to guess who is the tour.
Yes.
And what prize do they win if they guess it?
10 grand?
No, you can't say that because do you remember
Why?
ITV got in loads of trouble one time when
Yeah,
they
but they're
weren't paying
regulated
out.
a lot more strictly than we are.
Yeah, but I don't think we should make promises like that.
I don't know, 10 grand.
I don't think we should make promises
I'm
like
promising
that.
it.
Right. Okay. I'm just letting everyone know this has nothing to do with me.
And I refute that.
I'm not. Right, ready?
Yep.
Oh, wait, hang on.
Oh, you gotta give him that huck. Tour. Spit on that thing, you get me?
So in a game that will sweep the nation, you've got to work out the people saying tour.
Do you remember that they used to do this on like Magic Breakfast? They'd have like 3 little sounds and you had to guess what the sound was.
It's really like breakfast radio energy.
Yeah.
Which is something I'd like to inject more into the podcast.
I would too. What should we do?
More
What-
phone-ins?
What scandals have like become of certain breakfast radio programs? Do you know what?
There's a big one.
There is the funniest clip I've ever seen. I've only been able to see it because someone who works there showed it to me. I don't think it's on the internet, but I'm just going to describe it to you.
Okay.
This woman, she's in the studio, right?
Yep.
And it's like 2 celebrity breakfast presenters. It's one of the biggest radio shows. And she wins a trip to Disney. Instead of reacting in a normal way by being like, oh, I'm so excited, she starts projectile vomiting. It's one of the funniest things I've ever seen.
That's so funny.
And
what a stressful reaction that must be.
but you won't believe how much vomit comes out of her.
Do you think
I don't know what she ate that morning.
Do you think she's allergic to whatever chemical is produced by being happy? Do you think she's, whenever she like
Aren't we
sees
all
something
allergic?
she enjoys, just
It was extraordinary, and she's in pajamas as well, which is like one of the weird, one of the weird parts of this. And it's like it's quite a well-known celebrity. She's like, "Oh, darling, you've been sick everywhere." It's so funny. Yeah, I don't know if it went out on air or whether they pre-recorded it so it didn't go out on air. I don't know.
That's so funny.
But just the idea that like anyone who was listening wouldn't have known necessarily she'd projectile vomited. But the celebrity host was like, just for our audio listeners.
that gives you like Dick and Dom in the Bungalow energy.
Yeah.
They must have had some real fuck ups with like children, like unruly
This is a fully
children
grown
vomiting.
adult. This is a fully grown adult.
Yeah, so like even like if she's vomiting with excitement at a trip to Disneyland, imagine you're like a 10-year-old and you've just won like a Robo Sapien or something like that.
A Robo Sapien?
Yeah.
What is that?
Oh, it was like a toy. It was like
Isn't a Robo Sapien just like a robot human, like just a normal robot?
No, what maybe, but it's a toy. It's a specific toy from like when we were growing up.
Okay.
Yeah, I got one for Christmas. It was sick. It was like a remote control robot thing.
Yeah.
So it was an example of a toy. Imagine, okay, a Beyblade or something like that.
What?
A Beyblade.
A Beyblade.
Are you joking?
What did you say?
A Beyblade.
A Beyblade. What are you saying?
Are you taking the piss? We're not that different in age.
What are you saying to me?
The Beyblade. You know the top. The
Beyblade.
Top,
Oh, Beyblade. And what do you do with it? I don't know what it is. Sorry.
I'm saying. Do you not know what a Beyblade is?
No, I don't. Sorry.
It's like a spinning top toy, and you would like attach it to this like ejector thing, and
Yeah.
you'd fire it into a bowl, like a stadium thing, and they would like fight each other.
Why would I know what that is?
Because you were a child in like the time that they were popular.
I didn't, but
Did you go to school with boys?
yeah, but I don't think that, like, when you went to school, you didn't bring your toys in, did you?
Oh, we did.
Did you?
They got banned. They got banned because a boy called Callum was a victim of like a Beyblading, where they like someone like gashed all down his cheek because they got someone fired.
How
at him.
sharp were these babies?
Quite like, well, they spun really, really fast.
Right.
I would
I was a Lego man myself. Yeah.
So imagine, the point remains, imagine on Dick and Tom in the Bungalow.
Oh, right, okay.
You win a Lego set, and if a grown woman is vomiting at Disneyland, you are probably like vomiting and shitting at the same time.
If I got bought a Lego set when I was a child.
If no of you won one.
I don't think I would be.
Okay, imagine you get a Beyblade and a Lego set.
But I don't know what a Beyblade is.
Am I going insane? Am I the only one who knows what a Beyblade is?
No, I know.
Laura, do you know? Okay, Laura knows.
I did win a competition once on the Disney Channel.
Did you?
My grandparents had Disney.
Yeah.
And so I, like...
Loved it.
No, like, she was like, why don't you call in? And I was like, I'll do that.
What did you win?
And I won, like, some absolute tat.
And then did you vomit?
I remember being really excited. So maybe I can understand how you how that woman vomited.
There was in one comic, there was like a fill in this form and you might win something. There was something I remember you like were guaranteed to win this like activity set.
Nativity set.
Activity set.
Activity set.
which seemed like I was like, well, there's no competition then.
Right.
Seems much more transactional. This.
The more I think about it, the more I think about what I actually won, compared to what I could have won.
Well, talk us through the disparity?
I just remember it being like a kind of drawstring rucksack thing.
Right.
And in it had like a glowing badge. There might have been a T-shirt and a pen.
That sounds all right.
It was not like... But it's like the Disney Channel. So like when I think about it, I'm like, why wasn't I winning like a trip somewhere?
Because of the risk of vomiting.
Well, look, we've come full circle, haven't we?
They can't promise that anymore. Speaking of
vomiting
with excitement
Yeah.
about the UK's industrial future, talk us through what's been happening.
Oh, it's been a big day here.
Yep.
Industry leaders have met at the Guildhall. We're talking big bosses, big investors, GSK, Nissan, BP. I was about to call him something completely else then. Eli Lilly, the whole lot. They're all down there right now, listening to Keir Starmer talk about their green industrial plan, about how the government are going to approach managing business in the future. Big focus on life sciences, the creative sector, finance as an enabler, and defence extraordinarily. All of those are going to be priorities. So Keir Starmer said there's going to be no more bureaucracy. He's pitching pro-growth, pro-business and pro-workers. A confident economy where businesses can invest. It's actually a very good time for the UK if you look around. Mm-hmm. The US is in disarray, going into a unpredictable election. You look over to somewhere like France or Italy, bit edgy to put your money there at the moment. Mm-hmm. The UK has a bit of luck. You might want to invest here. The only drawback is that, well, this is what I can't quite understand. They haven't announced the budget yet. The budget's not until the end of October. Well, it's in, 14 days' time now. If you were a business, you'd probably want to know if you're going to have to pay increased employment contributions on national insurance or if there's going to be a potential capital gains tax before you put your money down. However, this hasn't deterred some investments. There's about £50 billion worth of announcements today, more than double the £28 billion announced under the Tories.
That is interesting. The point you made about it being a good time for the UK, one downside is the UK is actually quite a small market compared to the European Union.
Yeah, but with the gateway.
US. With the gateway, I suppose. But it is a comparatively small market. So I think Starmer's talk of deregulation, and he didn't say bonfire of red tape, but it was like that, I wonder, is there a point about, in order to attract these people to invest in the UK, you just have to bend over backwards?
Well, yes,
I
suppose so, because, and that's what the Tories were grappling with in the last year or so of the Sunak administration, was the sort of realisation that it's very difficult to get companies to invest because your main selling point used to be that you were the gateway to Europe, that you could come and you could make products here in an English-speaking country if you're an investor from the US, and then you could export them all over Europe. That was a really big selling point. And obviously since Brexit, you're now not able to do that. So when Starmer is talking about this sort of litany of red tape and bureaucracy, there's only so much that they can do as an administration. They can do sort of subsidies or tax relief. But in terms of the Brexit question still looms. You look at one of the ways that the Conservatives tried to solve the issue. They put that free port in Teesside. Yeah. And that is a completely deregulated free port. It means that if you bring in steel from pretty much anywhere in the world and you also export it again from that free port, you don't pay any tax on it, right? It's like it never actually came in and out of the country. It's not good for growth. It's not good for jobs, and it does nothing for the local economy. So what they're trying to do is, it's sort of more of that, really, isn't it?
Yeah, they're trying to straddle two horses. They're trying to straddle being pro-business, pro-trade, while also trying to be pro-worker in a way that doesn't spook the other. They're riding two horses and hoping neither of them spook the other.
There might be three horses, then.
Three horses?
Well, yeah.
Who's the third horse?
The invisible hand.
No. Leading the charge.
Yeah.
Ahead. Peter Kyle said something interesting.
He did.
Today, on the Today programme. What's Peter Kyle been up to?
I feel bad that I've spoken a lot, and I'm going to have to do a bit of explaining.
Go nuts.
Okay. So, in the UK, we have a voluntary scheme for branded medicines. If you are a branded medicine, you're, say, from US Big Pharma, you can sign up to this voluntary agreement if you want to sell your drugs to the NHS, which essentially means that it's sort of an agreement between NHS England, the Association of British Pharmaceutical Industry, and the government. That means every year on year, you won't be able to put up your pricing for that medicine more than 5%. So if you've got a drug, say, like Ozempic, that is used on the NHS for people with diabetes, it suddenly exploded over the last couple of years because people were using it as a weight loss drug. That market forces might then say, do you know what? There's a lot of demand for this and the supply is still the same. We're going to push the prices up. Well, you wouldn't be able to do that if you're selling into the NHS. Mm-hmm. It just basically means it keeps the NHS budget under control. And it saves something like £14 billion every 5 years for the NHS. It's extraordinary. Now, there's a company called Eli Lilly. They are a pharmaceutical company, and they pulled out of the scheme this January of 2023. And they pulled out of it because they were like, look, well, I guess their argument was, we'd like some more money.
Yep.
There's also some red tape in there about getting trial drugs into the NHS. It's a bit more difficult under this current scheme. Now, they're back, baby. They're back today, and they've announced a big new investment in the UK. Now, why might that be? Let's listen to this clip.
Not cutting corners, not lowering standards, but making sure that the government takes on some of the burden of compliance so that our nation can benefit.
We heard from the boss of Eli Lilly on the programme earlier, David Rick, suggesting that's all very well, but if the NHS then, in the case, for example, of an innovative drug says, no, we're going to hold the price down, no, we can't produce this new development, anti-obesity drugs, for example, there's not a lot of point. So you're willing to get rid of that red tape in order to allow those big US pharma giants to push their drugs into the health service quicker?
We are, Nick, and we're not just taking one step forward. Since we've come into government in the last couple of months, we're taking multiple steps forward. So for the first time ever, the Secretary of State for Health, Wes Streeting, has taken personal responsibility for spreading innovation through the NHS. That's the first time it's been a cabinet-level post. And it's great that the Chief Executive of Eli Lilly is here, and that Eli Lilly is playing a key part in this investment summit, because they have not invested freshly in our country for a very long time, and they now see this as a place to start doing business again.
This is really rather interesting, to use the language of the boss of Eli Lilly, Mr. Kyle. He said to us, you really need to get quite different to make things interesting. I think what he's saying is that for what he called a small market, which Britain is now because we're no longer in the EU, you have to be willing to regulate less than the EU in order to make it worthwhile for investors to come here. Is that what you're saying today? You will regulate less than the EU in order to make Britain more attractive?
Actually, what I would say that you need to regulate smart.
So that's Peter Carl there, the Secretary of State for Science and Technology. And he is saying, yes, we are going to rip up any red tape that means US big pharma companies who want to make a profit might not want to sell into the NHS. Now, if you were someone who was concerned about the privatisation of the NHS, this might concern you.
I thought it was interesting, though. He talks a lot about, in that interview in general, just about, it's quite like tech bro-y speak about the thing about innovation is it's cross-sector. As if that's that's the most nothing-y statement in the world. Like,
word salad.
Yeah, word salad, like AI, like all these buzzwords about come and hang out with us. We've got beanbags. It was such like a nothing-y statement. And I think the point you make about the potential for drug price rises in the UK is like if American companies are allowed to do that, you have the situation where this is worst case scenario. Martin Shkreli raised the price of that AIDS medication up from I think $15 to about $700, which is absolutely extraordinary. Like there just isn't that. We don't have that in the UK. We aren't aware of the predatory culture of pharmaceutical companies, and it's a slippery slope potentially.
It is a slippery slope because if you are a big pharma company, ultimately you are somewhat short of reality if you're in the finance department because you've got to make the company money. You're providing for the shareholders, right? And I'm not saying that everyone who works in private healthcare doesn't care, but the two models don't really work side by side unless you have the sort of agreement that we already have. Because you look at some of the drugs that come into the NHS, there was a big row with, I'm scared to name any American pharmaceutical companies because they're so litigious, aren't they? There's a European version and American version that both made a vaccine at one point.
Yep.
And if you looked at the cost difference, I'm not talking about the COVID vaccine, but they did also make that. The cost difference, one was American, one was European. It was extraordinary.
And P&O have turned up after all the nonsense this week.
Yes. So DP World, which is the parent company of P&O, were very offended this week. Very offended. Because Louise Haigh, the Transport Secretary, had the audacity to peddle the line that has been peddled for the last 2 years since the original P&O scandal, a line that was also peddled by Grant Shapps, the then Transport Secretary under the Conservative government, that you should boycott P&O because they unceremoniously sacked 800 people. Just sent over a Zoom link and was like, tune in, fellas.
It was a pre-recorded video.
You might want to listen in.
Yep.
Sacked them and then rehired all of those staff on some of them for about £3 an hour. It was it led to this big fire and rehire push, which is now going to be in the Workers' Rights Bill. It was one of the most reprehensible things you could possibly do. And DP World were like, well, P&O, we're going to go bust. It's like, it doesn't work like that. It doesn't work like that. If you had to lay off half of the staff and cut the services because of cost, all right, maybe you can work around employment law that way. But just to sack everyone and bring in cheaper labour, what's stopping every other company in the UK doing that then?
I also, as well, the discourse around that was suggesting, you've pissed off a business. Well, they're not going to come anymore, as if you have to kowtow, as if you have to uncritically accept anything a business does because they're going to invest in the UK, as if you can't stand up for British workers, which you might expect a Labour government to do. Are you surprised a Labour Transport Secretary is suggesting that workers were treated poorly?
And the audacity. Did you see that line that was being bandied about, which was basically look, DP World were actually doing us a favour by investing in the London Gateway. It was going to be brilliant. And it was had to be pointed out by multiple different politicians of all persuasions. Sorry, that's actually a really lucrative contract, and a company would like that contract.
Yeah. A business is there to make money.
Yeah.
They're not doing us a favor. In what world is a massive company giving Britain something as a favour? Investing in Britain because they love Britain.
Well, to be fair, during the pandemic, there were actually a number of people who really, really cared.
Well, it's such a good point.
And they did things like took a lot of money from the government.
And gave them
nothing back.
That's such... No, you're actually... And do you know what was important about that? It contributed to the national spirit.
It did.
Which really got us through that everyone pulling together. Some of us didn't see our grandparents and went to like Zoom funerals, and others just got millions of pounds.
Yeah.
And those are the same things.
But look, that's the individualist society that I'm aiming for.
Absolutely. We should have done that.
Do you think we should have turned up and we should have gone, listen, Michael. Can I call you Mike? We're going to provide you. What should we provide them with?
PPE.
No, that's too obvious.
Too obvious. Like the promise of a tech hub in Dover.
Tech hub in Dover. I think they'd go for that.
Yeah.
I reckon that. Do you know what we could do? We could rehire all of those. We'll pitch. We're going to rehire all of those ferry workers who are laid off by P&O, and we're going to make a tech hub.
And they're going to work on AI that will eventually replace them.
And do you have any experience in this field, Edward Campbell? Perfect.
And that's probably how that conversation went.
On the dotted line, fella.
Absolutely. Where do I sign? Somebody stop me.
There'll be no lines to sign for, though, soon, will they? No lines to sign on anymore. No red tape. No bureaucracy.
That is an odd thing, but being like, I think regulation's quite good.
So do I.
Being like, oh, there's a reason this rule is here.
There's really funny when you hear sort of like the kind of, I'm not saying that I'm like older or inexperienced or anything. I'm actually very young.
Not young enough to know what a Beyblade is.
But there's sort of like some of the kind of like new intake of commentators who've come through the think tank route will say things like, look, I just think that we should deregulate the city. And it's like, listen.
Whoa.
We've been here before.
We have been here before.
It's only been like 16 years. It's like, what do you mean?
Sorry, I was 5.
Yeah. Sorry about that.
Sorry.
And actually, my dad did very well out of the pound.
My dad actually bet against it.
Yeah.
My dad was in The Big Short.
Yeah. Good film, that.
Very good film. That's our hot take. Big Short's a good film.
Big Short is a good film. I think one of the best lines in that, or like the bit that kind of like made me go, was the stripper angle. That the strippers always know that there's a impending financial crisis before the bankers do.
Talk us through that again for those who haven't seen The Big Short.
Well, men are spending less money with them.
Very true.
And they notice it then they'll be like, oh, there's a financial crash looming.
Yeah, since the cost of living crisis, my stripper attendance has plummeted.
Has it?
Barely once a week now.
Barely once a week. Well, we used to do it in the office, didn't we? We used to...
After a podcast record. You didn't see after the 100th episode, we just went to the strippers afterwards.
Yeah.
My friend told me about some of his friends who they go to the strippers so frequently, they call it the rippers.
The rippers?
Yeah.
What do you mean?
They just go like, rippers tonight? They go so habitually that they have a shorthand for it.
I mean, it is a really good night out.
Is it?
Yeah. I've had a few good nights out in a strip club.
Really?
Yeah.
Not to be extremely pick-me, I've never been.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, look at this guy.
I'm a feminist.
Yeah. I also I can't imagine you doing well in that environment.
I think you find it, I don't really see the attraction at all. You just go and get a boner.
But I think if you were like hammered.
You get a boner and you're drunk.
Because it's not even that. I think it's sort of like, do you know what it probably is? I think it's the solution at the moment to London's nightlife crisis.
More strip clubs.
Because they're open all through the night, aren't they?
Yeah.
Whereas not a lot of clubs and bars are.
Very true. It's casinos and strip clubs.
Casinos and strip clubs. We used to go to the Hippodrome in Leicester Square. I work around the corner, but we used to go there all the time after, like, because if you came off air at 1 a.m., which actually you did for quite a lot of shows, you'd be like, well, where can we go and drink in the centre of London? Oh, only the casino. Mm-hmm. And also, my sphere or my stomping ground has been limited because I can no longer go to the Slug and Lettuce in Romford.
That was your favourite haunt?
It was, yeah.
Actually. What's the worst place you've had a drink?
What's the what? You should ask me that before.
Sorry, most like vibeless place.
Don't know. You give me an example.
I'm trying to think now.
Most vibeless place I've had a drink.
I think there's some really like soulless places where like there's a bar. Hot take from me.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep.
I think sometimes you'll... Okay, in like, if I'm in a big city,
Yep.
the idea of going to like an all bar one or a slug and lettuce or
Yep.
a be at one is one of the most, like, it's just horrible.
Yep.
Like, there's just nothing nice about it. Like, people are rude to you. It's a lot of bridge and tunnel. Like, it's just not a pleasant, everyone's out for a fight. It's not good. However, if you're not in a major city, the major cities that I'm in are literally London or Liverpool.
Yes.
Nowhere else.
Yep.
They're actually all right.
You'd recommend
That's my hot take.
going to one in like Manchester?
No, because that's a big city.
No,
isn't
no.
it?
You only mentioned London and Liverpool.
I said those are the cities I go to.
Sorry, excuse me. I was being a dick.
They're actually okay. Like, for example, that's Slugford Romford. Slugford. Slug and lettuce Romford.
That's the hub of Romford.
I actually could have had a good time there.
Were it not for the vexatious practice of the bouncers down the road.
Well, look, listen. It wasn't her fault that she tried to make a false police claim, and then when it wasn't upheld because she had to backtrack.
You citizens arrested her.
I've been thinking about that event, and I think if I'm to have children, I probably wouldn't want, like, if I had boys, I don't think I'd want them going out, and it would be nothing to do. It would be all to do with the bouncers. Looking at that bouncer, just because male bouncers do it too. They love the fight, and just like the idea that they would want you to be put into a cell overnight, even though you've done nothing wrong. That really scares me.
Yeah, I think I've been chucked out for like literally doing nothing. As in being like, I can't really think of an example, but I have been like, and you just could have walked out and, okay, well, my night's over. Shit.
I can't
annoying.
imagine you really starting a problem.
No, just been like, okay, well, I guess I'm leaving now. Bye, everybody. No, my night's over.
Where's the most vibless place that you've had a pint?
I think maybe in the Premier Inn in Workington.
That is quite, yeah.
Yeah, that was for Extreme Britain. It was the most, me and our old colleague Harry, R.I.P. Were actually, it was just in the bar in the Premier Inn we were staying in, and it was just like harsh downlighting and whatever. And it was quite like a weird, like it was a really foggy evening, and the Premier Inn was in like this strange, like quite liminal part of town. So it was quite like, it was very disconcerting walking from the train station there. It wasn't particularly.
So you're already on edge.
Yeah, and you're just like, okay, well, now going to sit in this Premier Inn space.
We had a nice pint once in Dover. Do you remember?
Yes, that was a cool pub.
Yeah, it was nice,
Yeah,
wasn't it?
we spoke to the mayor of Dover,
We did.
and yeah, and then that was good. We go to Dover quite a lot
Yeah, we
for
do.
work.
Very uplifting going down there, isn't it? We
Yeah,
always
love
go
it.
for good reasons.
Absolutely.
All right, shall I vacate now?
Yes, we've got a special treat for the listeners who demand more Laura. We've got more Laura, and we've not trailed it. So if you clicked off before now, too bad.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Should we swap you in?
Yeah. See ya.
American politics is very confusing, isn't it, Chris? Bush, Mount Rushmore. American politics, Chris, it's very confusing, isn't it?
What?
American politics, it's confusing.
Oh, yes.
But we've got a solution, don't we?
Solution.
The podcast.
Oh, the podcast.
Exactly.
The podcast. Yes, we've created a podcast called American Friction to help better explain all the confusing, upside-down, weird world of US politics, from crowd sizes to conspiracy theories.
That's American Friction with me, Jacob Jarvis.
US troops.
That's American Friction with me, Jacob Jarvis.
That's right, and me, Chris Jones, and our friend Nikki McCann Ramirez, out every Friday.
Wherever you get your podcasts.
There's 2 George Bushes.
Idiot.
Hello, Laura.
Hello, Ed.
Welcome. We subscribe to Identity Politics and PoliticsJOE, so only Scottish people get to talk about Scottish politics.
Exactly.
You're here, we're here to talk about probably the biggest political news over the weekend, the death of Alex Salmond at the age of 69. Towering figure over Scottish politics, British politics for the last 40 years.
Yeah, I wonder if you'd agree that I feel like he's the politician that's had, within my lifetime, the most influence over my life. So for him to die, it feels like quite a big thing. And I don't know if you'd agree that you think he's as influential as that.
I would disagree, but I'm curious to hear your argument as to why.
So I was 14 when the independence referendum happened, and it's probably some of my first political memories. And I remember it being so constantly talked about. There was it felt like the whole nation was engaged in this conversation. I mean, it felt quite like how Brexit felt too. So he has such profound like first political memories. And I remember it being talked about at school, and we straw polled it at school. And I also don't really remember a Scotland that wasn't governed by the SNP.
Yep.
And then obviously Nicola Sturgeon during the Brexit years and her first ministership as well.
Yeah, I get that. I would say maybe Boris Johnson or Nigel Farage has actually had more impact in that
Yes.
Scotland is still in the United Kingdom.
But they're not dead.
No, they're not. No, they're not dead. I know they're not dead. But your point as to a politician who's had the most impact.
Yeah.
Leaving the European Union has had
definitely.
a much more effect on your life.
I think I misphrased. I think I meant he's the first politician to die that I felt has had quite a profound influence during my lifetime.
Sorry for being so pernickety over your statement. No, massively influential. I think unless you're Scottish, even if you're Scottish, you'd actually struggle to name the first ministers before Alex Salmond.
Definitely.
He revolutionised the office. He completely presidentialised it in a way that Nicola Sturgeon mimicked, and in a way that notably Humza Yousaf and John Swinney haven't been able to, or don't feel inclined to do. He's completely dominated Scottish politics, and I think it's very difficult to talk about Alex Salmond and his importance in Scottish politics while keeping in mind his pretty atrocious behaviour while in office. And I think it's important to remember those two things being true. And I think what's quite revealing about kind of the toxicity or the division in Scottish politics is people, if you tweeted what I've just said, you'd be absolutely torn apart by one side of the independence debate. Because I think people are so, he's one of ours, therefore he's a good guy, I think is the attitude.
It's interesting how I think he went from being a unifying figure within the Scottish independence movement. If you look at how he took the independence movement from being quite a fringe, activist-y group in Scotland to also a group that was viewed as white and Protestant. And he worked to expand it into the broad church that we know the party as, by reaching out to the Catholic community in Scotland, the Scottish Asian community. But then he was also the person that created such a rift in the Scottish independence movement post him losing his seat in 2017, and then forming a new party, quite litigiously going after his old colleagues in the Scottish government. I think actually Kenny Farquharson, who used to be a national reporter and who used to write
Great columnist in the Times.
Yeah, great columnist. I actually thought he had the most interesting take on this, or summed it up very well. He said, "I watched with rising disgust as Salmond then sought revenge on the SNP, on Nicola Sturgeon, on the civil service, reporters who broke the story. Revenge on the women who had the temerity to complain. Salmond pursued them with the tenacity and single-mindedness he had once pursued Scottish independence. It was ugly, relentless, pitiless and pitiful. For a man of such talent and achievement, it was a sorry end." And I think he kind of summed up how it was almost the same character quality that made him such a good politician was also the same character quality that ultimately led to his downfall.
There's a really good two-part documentary series on iPlayer called Salmond and Sturgeon, A Troubled Union, which I watched yesterday. And in it, you can see how Alex Salmond talks about how important loyalty is to him. And you can see that in the way that he ran the SNP during his first ministry, and when he was leader, it was such a tight ship, and he required kind of just loyalty to. He had no time for public disagreement, and if in his mind he was betrayed by people he considered friends, and that seemed to have been one of his big, that's a cardinal sin for him. You can see why he went after them with such viciousness as well, which I think is interesting. Now is, so 10 years on from the referendum, Nicola Sturgeon and Alex Salmond were still the two biggest figures in Scottish nationalism. Now we don't have Salmond anymore, and Sturgeon is in the shadows, well, pending Operation Branchform. I don't know whether she'll come back, but I'm curious what you think this might mean for the independence movement, because he was the figurehead of independence cranks. I don't know what do you call Alba? Like the kind of
Alba, I think, was almost a group of SNP MPs that felt quite aggrieved by the direction, the progressive direction Nicola Sturgeon had taken the party.
Or even just
in.
Salmond loyalists.
Yeah.
Like, does Alba survive without Salmond?
No, well, they didn't win their seats back in the general election.
So they got one MSP.
Yeah, Ash Regan.
Ash Regan. Is she going to be the leader of that? I suppose by default she is, I guess.
Well, I wonder if 2026, which is when the next Scottish parliamentary elections are, is going to be the real tell of whether it is the end of the years we've had dominated by the Scottish independence debate. Because the SNP winning majorities at Holyrood, it shouldn't have been able to happen. Like, Labour set up devolution in Scotland and the voting system in a way that majorities couldn't be produced. And they did it as a way to kind of wipe out the calls for independence. And Alex Salmond somehow managed to succeed within a system that was a voting system that was set out against him. So I wonder in 2026 what it's going to look like, how many seats are going to be taken up by pro-independence parties.
Yeah, especially as well because you'd think prior to the general election, you thought, well, the SNP are on to absolute plumps, they're going to get a kicking by Labour. But now you've got kind of a lame Labour government and a lame SNP government. So you wonder what's the stronger argument for this. I wonder as well, talking about the presidentialisation of the First Minister's office, like Alex Salmond literally arrived in a helicopter to claim victory in 2007 at the Scottish elections, which is probably the most presidential thing you can do. Why do you think that has not been mimicked by Humza Yousaf and John Swinney?
I think it goes back to what we were saying about Alex Salmond and Nicola Sturgeon as political operators, and also the type of power that politicians can wield. Like, you can wield as a politician a kind of bureaucratic power, or you can wield a charismatic power. And I felt like Nicola Sturgeon and Alex Salmond really used like charismatic politics to win such large elections. And I feel like John Swinney and Humza Yousaf just haven't been those type of operators.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think as well, I wonder if there's an appetite within the SNP to completely veer away from that personality style leadership. I think someone described Sturgeon's operating of the SNP as Stalinist, which is extreme. Yeah, obviously extreme. But it was the whole party was made in her image. She had total control over it, and she was such a prominent figure within it.
What do you make of some of the ways, the reaction to his death, some of the ways that he's being remembered?
In what sense? Like the extremely positive ways?
Yeah. How do you view that?
I think a lot of it is people don't like to speak ill of the dead, particularly so soon after. I think you have to say he's we've done. He's been one of the most influential politicians of the 21st century. I think also as well, people like to venerate people that are on their side, that they perceive as allies. And if you make any mention of the complaints of sexual harassment against him, you don't speak ill of the dead. You're stirring up things that shouldn't be spoken about so soon after his death. I think you have to take the man as a whole, and he should be remembered as a whole. And he was, just a complicated, a real dark side to him.
Yeah.
But also led. I think a lot of people he gets a lot of benefit of the doubt from nationalists because he invigorated the debate so much, and people would be quite reluctant to give him up.
I think so too. I think it's hard to look at who Alex Salmond was, or who the public thought he was in 2014, and kind of square that image with who Alex Salmond was in the last few years, which was taking money from Kremlin-backed TV during the invasion of Ukraine, and internal investigations at the Scottish government found that he had been sexually inappropriate to female civil servants, and his own defence lawyer also said that he had been touchy-feely and described his behaviour towards women as inappropriate.
Yeah, I think if your defence in that circumstance is like, I'm a creep but I'm not a criminal, that's not brilliant. I also think his kind of public behaviour recently had a real lack of grace to it. I don't know if you saw the content that he was making like during the Euros, but it was quite, I don't know, undignified for a former First Minister to kind of be behaving in the way, if you want to maintain the weight that you had in office and some sense of gravitas, I think he completely torched his entire reputation and any good and any influence that he might have had as like an elder statesman. Like, I just don't know why he didn't. I think that's actually his fatal flaw almost, was his own sense of importance.
Oh, definitely.
So when he stepped down, he, instead of just kind of retiring to be like a John Major figure or like a Tony Blair figure or Gordon Brown figure and just intervening when the country needs you, sort of thing.
Start a think tank.
Start a think tank and then give speeches to autocracies around the world and make a ton of cash. Which he wasn't a million miles away from that. But he decided to go back into politics. He was an MP for the SNP from 2015 to 2017, and it was his frustration of not being taken as seriously as he felt he should have been taken. Which, if you've like, credit where credit's due, he transformed the SNP into a party of government, which is like, is that like the Green Party becoming the government in like 20 years? Is that like a comparable achievement?
Yeah, I mean, not comparable in terms of politics, but in terms of going from the fringe to the centre. I think it's more like reform, going from having 4 MPs this election to in 10 years' time being the governing party. Yeah,
it's a huge achievement. And I suppose as you get older and become less relevant, and especially as someone who you see as your protege, is taking your, it's like it's taking the shine off your reign, then I think psychologically that'd be really hard to deal with. And he's kind of lashed out in a pretty horrendous way.
Yeah, I mean, in 2021, which was when I think we kind of saw this almost revenge seeking starting to come from Alex Salmond. It was at a time where his popularity had plummeted to single figures, and Nicola Sturgeon's was at its highest that it had ever been. Yeah,
and then he started to appeal to his politics changed, I suppose, whether it was his actual politics or not anymore, but he started to appeal to the real fundamentalist Scottish nationalists, because they were looking for somebody. Like, there's a real frustration from some people in the independence movement that Nicola Sturgeon wasn't as radical as them of just demanding independence. You get a lot of things like, there's interesting debates whenever there's an SNP leadership contest of people saying, like, remember Ash Regan's readiness thermometer? Yeah. Which, for those who don't know, is Ash Regan, when she was running to be leader of the SNP against Kate Forbes and Hamza Yousaf, suggested that on, I think it was Buchanan Street in Glasgow, they would prepare an independence readiness thermometer where, as you got closer to the readiness for independence, it would be like the mercury in it would raise, I suppose, until you were like ready, as if that's not an entirely subjective thing, as if someone wouldn't have to go up to the top and pour more mercury in. I don't know if she was trying to use like sorcery or something, but there is that, there was a frustration within the independence movement who the SNP is not home for them anymore, and he was very happy to lie with them and to get them to take their energy to form Alba.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it goes back to that, how he went from being a unifying force within the independence movement to a divisive one. What's
the path forward for the independence movement, do you think? Do you think there is one?
I mean, it's interesting because ever since 2014, the support for independence has stayed the same, regardless of what's happening with the SNP. So I do wonder if that will be able to maintain momentum. But I think, like I said earlier, the true test, I think, will be 2026. Yeah,
it just seems, I just don't think there's anything that exciting within the independence movement. If we're still talking about Nicola Sturgeon and Alex Salmond, like, I'm sorry, your movement isn't exciting. Who are the young faces of the independence movement?
I mean, I think within the SNP, there's still some quite talented, gifted politicians, people like Stephen Flynn. But I think it depends whether they choose to run in Holyrood or Westminster, and whether they choose to run for First Minister.
There are a lot of young people, younger politicians, I guess, within the Scottish Cabinet and the Scottish Parliament, but they are just tainted. They served in the government the past 17 years, and I think they actually might face the problem that the Conservatives are facing, where how can you be the change candidate where you were in government for 17 years? I think I wonder if it's just ground to a halt. I might be wrong entirely.
Well, I think if there's polling that says what issues are coming up on the doorstep, what matters to Scottish voters, and constitutional issues like independence have just fallen much further down the list than they once were because of things like cost of living.
I think it's like 6 or 7 or something. It's it's really not very high. And regardless of the support, I actually think a lot of the support is like, oh yeah, I support it, but like, why now? Like I can't I can't afford my heating bill. Will that fix it? Like I think if they campaigned again, if they ran 26 election on independence, a lot of people would be like,
yeah, but I think they could run it on if things don't materially change for people in Scotland within the next year under this Westminster Labour government. It might be quite easy for them to just run as the anti-Labour candidates in Scotland.
But then they can't go, well, nothing has changed under us either.
Yeah,
they can't be like,
so you vote Conservative?
yeah. What is the answer?
The third party.
Scottish Lib Dems. Also as well, I think they've contested every single election as like, no, this is the independence thing.
Yeah.
That is really, it's really lost its luster. Like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, this again. Any further thoughts on Alex Salmond?
Read Kenny Farquharson's piece in the Times about him.
Yes, Kenny Farquharson's. I'm considering him one of my boys.
Are you?
It's Duncan Robinson and Kenny Farquharson.
Nice.
are my two boys that I would recommend. Do you have any boys to recommend? any girls even? Whose journalism you enjoy?
Marie LeConte. I'll show her.
Yes, another boy, Marie LeConte. I thought it was actually interesting from Dave Penman. He kind of summed up best the need to talk about Alex Salmond and not just give him hagiography, talk about him as the man that he actually was. So he's the General Secretary of the FDA, which is a civil servants union. So he said, criminality was settled at his trial, but his admissions over his own behaviour raised significant issues over his fitness for office. It also exposed a culture where those who worked for him felt unable to challenge those behaviours. I recognise this is difficult territory in the wake of an untimely death, but if his achievements are to be lauded, then his significant flaws and the impact they had on individuals shouldn't be forgotten.
Definitely.
Which I think sums it up. Anything else?
That's everything.
That's everything. That's the last word on Alex Salmond on Scottish Independent. Shall we wrap up?
Yeah.
Thank you everyone for listening. Remember to like and subscribe if you're listening to this. Follow us on wherever you get any sort of social media.
Yeah.
Come and join us on the PoliticsJOE subreddit, which is r/PoliticsJOE. Yeah, and have a lovely weekend. No, shit.
No, it's Monday.
No. No, I hope you had a nice weekend. Crap. Bye, everybody.